This lecture is co-sponsored by the UCLA Burkle Center for International Relations and, of course, by the School of Public Affairs. And we're thrilled to be partnering with the Burkle Center. These are issues of concern for both of our units. And Eric is I was just telling him I was at a roast for Steve Cooley the other night, and Eric was the featured performer. He is an accomplished singer and keyboard player, and did quite a, I think we might, anybody that does a parody to No Woman, No Cry is all right by me. But we're thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the school. So it is my job, I think, to make sure you all are comfortable and to let the program get going. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Cal Ostiala. Cal is going to, where'd you go, Cal? I lost you. There you are. Is going to come up and introduce our speaker. Thank you for coming.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So it's a great honor to welcome back to UCLA, City Council President Eric Garcetti. Eric was here recently. He's a frequent visitor to UCLA, always welcome here on campus. Eric is a lifelong Angelino, but throughout his life, he's combined a love of his city with a fascination with the larger world, and particularly issues of world politics, which I'll touch upon in his talk today. Eric's early career highlights include a Rhodes Scholarship, human rights advocacy, and even a stint as a professor of public policy at Occidental College here in Los Angeles. He was elected to the LA City Council in 2001 and to the council presidency in 2005. In areas as varied as affordable housing, gang intervention, clean drinking water, parks and the environment, and urban renewal, he has helped lead LA forward. His creative approach to problem solving reaches matters both high and low. As an example, he created a citywide system of furniture busters who go around picking up those old couches and mattresses that we see around city streets. So Eric is always creative in his thinking, whatever the issue may be. His achievements in government have drawn notice beyond our city limits. In 2006, the late Senator Ted Kennedy gave Eric the prestigious New Frontier Award, awarded to one elected official in the country under 40 years of age that best embodies John F. Kennedy's vision of leadership and idealism. As if this wasn't enough, Frank Gilliam already mentioned he's an accomplished jazz pianist. He's also a member of the U.S. Naval Reserve and remains active in Democratic Party politics, where most recently he served as co-chair of the Obama campaign in California. On a personal note, I've known Eric for many years, and I can't think of another person who so ably combines a passion for politics with pragmatism and policy analysis. He's a very smart guy, but he's also a very committed guy. So it's a great pleasure, and I think we're all fortunate as Angelinos to have him as our city council president. And of course, it's a great pleasure to invite him here and to hear from him. So please join me in welcoming Eric.
Thank you so much, Cal. Good afternoon. Good to be with you all. And thank you, Frank, as well, and everybody. So who's here because they're getting credit for it today? A couple people. All right, just that character. Right? You can go to sleep. The rest of you, don't worry. It is really wonderful for me to be back at UCLA. I started my education in this world here at UCLA. I went to what was just called UES back then, I guess the Lab School of Seeds. And as a child, UCLA was a place that gave me the first opportunity to kind of explore outside the sandbox, both literally and metaphorically. And UCLA for me has always been, it's still the best school I ever attended to date. Going through those 6 years, and back then it was a free school, it was a public school, or I think $100 if you could afford it. But it was an experiment that really tried to take literally set numbers in this post-quota age. It's kind of a sad loss, but strict numbers in terms of income and ethnicity and geography from the city of Los Angeles to put the entire city, the youth of the city, together in one school. and to learn about the world, not just in Los Angeles, but outside of Los Angeles in one place. And I think most of our personalities and who we are pretty set in stone by the time we are teenagers. The things that we seek to change about ourselves after that become exponentially more and more difficult. And that's why what UCLA's vision is to continue to educate from the very youngest to the oldest graduate student that we have, is one that is very much in the world and of the world. So it's very fitting for me, I hope, to be able to speak about UCLA, Los Angeles, its place in the world, and our place in the world collectively. It was first here that I began to imagine a world that was beyond here. And there's a cliche about Los Angeles that you walk the streets of LA and you see the face of the world. Growing up in Los Angeles, I always found the opposite to be true. When I left Los Angeles, in the world, I would see the face of LA. Because for me, this was normal. This is what the world is. And now doing what I do, which is an intensely local position, of course has intensely global reach. I have traveled to Armenia and Lebanon, to El Salvador and Mexico, to Japan and China and Korea, officially representing the United States and Los Angeles. Because if we just looked at our jobs as council members or as the mayor or county officials as something that we are supposed to focus inward at, we wouldn't even know the people that we are representing. So another quick show of hands. How many people were born here in Los Angeles? How many people were born in the United States but out of Los Angeles? And how many people were born from outside the United States? So that's an average LA day, right? In my own district, the 13th Council District, which is equal in population to all the other ones, but the smallest in geography, so it's the most densely populated swath of LA. We have people who speak more than 100 languages, a immigrant population of over 60%. Once you take into account people who are either immigrants or the children of immigrants in Los Angeles, it's more than half of the residents here. And if you don't look at national borders, but look at state borders, almost everybody is a migrant here to Los Angeles. It's a very pliable place, but it's also a very porous place, a place where I think people don't hold against you where you came from, but are looking for who you are and what you want to see. It's a forward-looking place. But I think too often we go a little too far with that in not recognizing that we're also a place of deep history and deep meaning. We are an older city than Washington, D.C. In 1769, a group of pobladores, or settlers, came here. Actually, just before them in 1769, it was a group of Franciscans who traveled through this area where we had had native populations for tens of thousands of years before that. Father Juan Crespi is one of them. There's a school in, maybe there's a graduate of Crespi here? Anybody? In the valley named after him. And he wrote in his journal when they set up camp north of where downtown is right now. If you've been to the State Historic Park, also known as the Cornfields, just north of downtown, where the Arroyo Seco and the Los Angeles rivers meet, that's where they had camp that evening. And it was on the day of St. Francis of Assisi, and as Franciscans, they knew that St. Francis's most beautiful spot on the face of the earth was Porciuncula, in Spanish Porciuncula, or in English, the small portion, a plot of land next to his church in Assisi where he would personally retreat to pray, to find solace, to think. And that evening when they looked up, if you know downtown and you want to kind of visualize this with me, where the Arroyo Seco and Los Angeles rivers meet, if you look to the northwest, you're looking up on one side Mount Washington and Glass Elk Park and Cypress Park. To the right, on the left would be Elysian Park and Dodger Stadium, and you're looking up towards Glendale. And it was so verdant and so beautiful, it reminded them of that place that St. Francis went to. And so they named the river, Rio de Nuestra Señora de los Ángeles de Porciuncula. It was the river of Our Lady of the Angels of the small portion. And Los Angeles as a place was born. They also wrote that evening that 3 earthquakes visited them that day. So it was a nice welcome. And also he wrote that one day a great mission would be built here. Because of course they were part of the missionizing movement. Now for both better and worse, Los Angeles never built a mission. But instead, 12 years later, one of the first Spanish settlements that was a civic settlement was the pueblo of Los Angeles, the town of Los Angeles. And I think it's important to know that history and to frame my comments as I quickly kind of fast forward up to the 21st century, because without knowing that history, without knowing that the composition of the volunteers, the pobladores, the settlers that the Spanish crown asked to settle, this pueblo 12 years later in 1781, they look like this room does today. There are few cities I know of, if any, where the founders, because the Spanish were obsessed with racial classification and sub-classification. If you're a quarter Indian and a quarter European and half Asian, there's a category for you. If you're half black and half white, there's a category for you. But what was interesting when you look at the records of the 44 pobladores that made it, is they traced their ancestry back to Africa, to the Americas, to Europe, and to Asia. There were two misclassified Chinos, which meant Chinese in Spanish, which were actually Filipinos, who were part of that mission to come here and to build this town. So it does, the seed that was planted back then of this kind of multi-ethnic, multicultural swirl, this place of collision, or as the movie a few years ago, Crashes, alluded to. This is what Los Angeles was from the beginning. We are a rowdy town. There was a mission just up the street in San Gabriel that had been started a few years before. When the monks would write about the residents of Los Angeles in the early years, they would say they're a bunch of drunkards, they're a bunch of folks who fought and came to us for clothes and sheep and chickens, and we'd have to give it to them again, but they'd always want their wine. And Los Angeles was truly a frontier town. Even when you look forward into the 19th century, the murder rate here in the mid-19th century was the equivalent of about 10,000 people a year dying in today's terms. It was a wild, wild place. But at the same time, there was a certain spirit here, which always looked outward to the world around us, and I think is still our destiny today. There are a few themes that I want to talk about today in laying out what our priorities are as a city. We could talk for hours and have a conversation. I hope I'd love to take some questions and make this a conversation as well. But I want to mark this moment in our time. Because in all of our history here in Los Angeles, I would say in the last probably 50 years, this is a very, very defining moment for us. I'm a child of Los Angeles, as my introduction mentioned. I'm actually, depending on how you count generations, but I had a great-grandfather who came here when he was 11, so if you count him, a fourth-generation Angelino. I have an Italian last name, but I'm actually half Mexican and half Jewish. It's a typical LA story. Both sides of my family settled in Boyle Heights originally. The Jews that fled the pogroms in the early 20th century in Russia and Poland. The Mexicans who came up fleeing the revolution at the same time. And while Boyle Heights is predominantly now just Mexican-American, any taco stand worth their weight is still selling you pastrami as well. So you see the collision in my family of what Boyle Heights meant to our family. My father grew up in South Los Angeles, graduated from Washington. I went here for law school, went to some other school for undergrad, but don't worry about that. My mom went here, later graduated from Berkeley, but she grew up in central Los Angeles and then west of LA. And I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, now live back in the center in Echo Park. To me, that geographical reach of Los Angeles in many ways also represents part of what our history has been. Most coastal cities will have their downtown at the ocean. We don't because of the story that I told you. The LA River is actually so critical to our history that part of our efforts now to revitalize it is in some ways reclaiming our very roots. We are an inland city, a city that was built as one of the original green cities. You know, if you look at a map of Los Angeles, everything's north, south, east, west on the cardinal points, except downtown where it shifts by 45 degrees. That was done because the original founders of the city knew that it was a better way to capture wind in the summertime and to get the sun in the wintertime, to keep the adobe that they used from the earth to build our city, sustaining our city. It was some of the first elements of that green building that was there. But we also have been a town, I think, that has defined itself too by being open enough to the world to embrace anybody and anything. And the priorities that we have to have is that right now I feel like Los Angeles is having a crisis of confidence. We don't know who we are anymore. This used to be a place where we never questioned that we could do anything here, whether it was the minds that we had that could help put a man on the moon, or at Caltech today. Caltech is the #1 university in the world for inventions that become patented. You have to put all the UCs together to be second place, and then so forth. You have the UCs that are engaged in that too. You have USC. You have people who've been brought together here to create the stories of our world, where if we were all cavemen and cavewomen, we'd probably be looking at the firelight, dancing with shadows to tell stories. Now they put them on celluloid or digital media. Hollywood was here for a reason. But if you ask the average Angelino right now, how are you feeling about the future? It does mirror general pessimism in this country in general, but it is more pointed to me as somebody who grew up here with that faith and optimism, because people don't really feel like the specific problems we have, we can really solve anymore. I mean, how many of you in this room feel like we'll really solve traffic? How many of you really feel like we'll make incremental steps on making our air healthier, as we have done since the 70s, but we're still going to have probably among the dirtiest air in America? How many people think the price of housing will become really affordable for people? We'll be able to have nice backyards or affordable apartments for people and attract the workforce that we need to. How many people feel that there is unity among all the geography that we have? Because if you look at the structure of Los Angeles, I think part of our optimism and part of our can-do spirit resulted in a pretty dysfunctional government in terms of how we structured it. Because if you look at two axes, the horizontal and the vertical, horizontally, how else could you explain 88 cities being part of a single county? The city of Los Angeles at 4 million, about a third, a little bit more than a third of the 11 million residents of LA County, but then drops down to Long Beach at 500,000, and down all the way to Bradbury and Vernon, where 75 people supposedly live, but they actually are mostly in Hancock Park, which is an industrial town. How else could you explain vertically why we have literally more than 20 concomitant levels of government, depending on what your problem is? And most of our problems cut through all of these. Imagine if you're a kid that wants to go to a good school. Well, you're walking on city streets that maybe on a bus that the county has. You may go to then the school district. You're looking at a rat infestation, which is a separate form of government. Vector control, if you have a mosquito or rat problem, is a totally different government. You're breathing air that the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in charge of. So vertically and horizontally, we've structured this place to not necessarily be a place for quick decisions and the implementation of bold solutions. That may be one of the reasons we have the pessimism that we do. But beyond that, I think part of our pessimism comes from us. Because at the end of the day, those are human-created structures and human-created entities. And the confidence that we have really lies on the shoulders of each one of you, in the minds of each one of you, in the hearts and in the guts of each one of you as well. For my family, both sides was full of entrepreneurs. My grandfather, Harry Roth, he was the son of the immigrant that came from Russia, Poland area, started a clothing company here named after his father, Louis Roth Clothes. Ran one of the first union garment shops downtown. It was a place that I loved going as a kid. He died when I was too young, but I remember when I was 6 years old being at his clothing store, my first job selling off ties on Wilshire Boulevard to sell the whole shop off. My grandfather, my Mexican grandfather, was married to my grandmother, Juanita, who was a meat packer. He was a barber who never graduated from junior high school. I remember being a kid, just a little piece of LA history, watching television, and there was a very distinguished looking African-American man on TV that my grandfather said, "Oh, I know him." And I asked my grandfather who he was, and he said, "Oh, that's the mayor, Tom Bradley." I said, "Oh, how do you know the mayor?" And I think I was 7 or 8. He said, "Oh, he arrested me when I was a young man." Yes, Tom Bradley had a Boyle Heights beat, and my grandfather, ran with, he always loved Jews, so he was happy when his son married my mom because he ran with Bugsy Siegel and Mickey Cohen, some of the kind of gangsters back then, but turned his life around during World War II when he fought in the Pacific Theater and came back here, got his citizenship, and then became a barber at USC. And I will mention USC, I've now named that campus, because it's very significant for my life, even though this is still the best school I've ever been to, that he cut the hair of university professors at a shop that he opened up at Olympic in Vermont. Because of that, my father learned about USC, won an academic scholarship to go there, and then I was able to, my first job when I graduated from graduate school was teaching at USC. And so we've had this nice kind of progression of our individual story here. One of the reasons I think that this was an entrepreneurial place is that we allowed people, that we were always a progressive and forward-looking state and city, we got out of the way when we needed to. So my first point, as somebody who, on my introduction, is a proud Democrat and progressive, but is also quite pleased to be in a legislative body that is nonpartisan, because we can be individuals and we can be who we are, and we can think across some of the ideology that often locks up and at a local level doesn't have as much relevance, is that we have built up so long that we sometimes are the problem. We've let government have this kind of creep that gets in the way. We need to know the things that we're good at and stand up for voices and perspectives that aren't there and be progressive about those. But red tape has no left-right leaning. It's just as red tape. Case in point, a friend of mine, she's the friend now, I didn't know her at the time, a woman came to us whose lifelong dream in Echo Park down the street from me was to open up a bakery. She wanted to make cupcakes, and she has a mean banana cream pudding. She makes incredible kind of southern delicacies. And yet when she went to the city to open up a bakery that's probably about a fourth the size of this room, the city said, okay, you need underground parking. You need a grease trap the size of a VW Bug. And it's no wonder that small businesses and independent businesses sometimes can't do it in LA, because if it was a Starbucks, it's a big enough company, they could wait it out, they could negotiate, they maybe could build the underground parking. I mean, on a pretty much residential street where there's no place to build underground parking. And one of the nicest things that's ever been said about me in my office, and I'm joined here by two other Bruins today, Alejandro Marroquin, who's one of my field deputies over there in the pink, and Marcel Porres, who is outside, because he's heard me speak enough times. That when we navigated the red tape for this woman, Genevieve, she said, in a Steve Lopez column where praise is not usually the order of the day, she said, we got small town help in a big city. Well, we've lost the idea of that. We've lost the idea of really trying to make sure that people's creative dreams don't find an obstacle. And increasingly, if any of you have ever tried to open up a business, or if any of you have tried to navigate city bureaucracy or government bureaucracy, it is not user-friendly. It is not inviting, it is not customer-focused, and yet we shouldn't just do those because that's the right way for human beings to interact. But when we wonder why the LA economy hasn't created the sort of middle-class jobs that we need to, since the riots occurred, we've actually lost jobs in Los Angeles, net loss of jobs. I repeat that, net loss of jobs before the recession even hit us. It is important on us all to be part of a mission that we see that these things are tied together. The ethic of LA right now is that we are great at saying no. If I told everybody right now, hey, there's a project that's 4 stories high that's going to be built around the corner from you, maybe it's affordable housing or something ugly with stucco, come on, we have to come out to a meeting. I could get a room packed like this to say, we are against it, we must stop something. But if I said to the same group, hey, let's get together next week and plan proactively what we want it to look like in this neighborhood for the next 20 years, and change the zoning and see what sort of businesses we want to have, how we can attract those and stuff, I'd get 2 or 3 people. And not from this group, you all would come, but 2 or 3 of you would come, and we don't get most of the Angelinos out there. We're very good at saying no. We're very good at killing things. We have lost our way of getting to yes, and to say what we are for, and learning how to compromise to move things forward. In this, I heard Robert Reich talking about this as the Great Recession the other day on NPR, and I love that as a term. I think many of us have tried to wrap our head around how is this recession, which is deeper and somewhat jobless in its recovery, different than other recessions. And I like the term the Great Recession, so I'm going to start using it from today too. I don't know if he came up with it. But in this Great Recession, the way it has hit Los Angeles, I think is indicative of many of the problems that we have in Los Angeles as well. And when you think about the creativity that we have here, the aerospace industry, a robust entertainment industry, a place that could invent the Korean taco, for God's sake. This is a place where we have never a shortage of ideas, but we are losing our ability to implement them, to see them through. But in fits and starts, there are some very hopeful signs. Whether it's Measure R, where we say, okay, we will tax ourselves a half cent to be able to build $40 billion worth of public transit and transportation improvements. Whether it's the way that we look at changing the neighborhood-based development. We see neighborhoods that begin to blossom because there's a focus on the streetscape again. In places like Silver Lake in my own district, or Atwater Village, where people begin to say it's not the size of the buildings or the scope of them, it's what does the streetscape do to interact with you as a human being when you now might have the option of walking around a new Hollywood where you can get off of a subway, go to the ArcLight cinemas, go to the farmer's market, see a play, meet friends at a restaurant, never have to be in a car for any of that, arrive by bike, go see a sporting event downtown or a concert on that same red line that will bring you back. I think there is a hopeful vision and picture of where things can go. but it certainly hasn't been embraced in a very universal way. If Los Angeles were an independent country, we would have the 15th largest economy in the world right now. So it would be just behind Australia and ahead of the Netherlands and Sweden. And clearly the global economy is at the center of where our recovery will be. In fact, we dip down more quickly in a recession, and we usually recover much more quickly. The last time we went through a pretty deep recession in the early 90s, the aerospace industry after the end of the Cold War was gutted, we had this remarkable retooling of our local economy. And unlike many towns where cars are the dominant part of the economy or finance is the dominant part of the economy, if you look at Los Angeles' economy, there really is no dominant part of it. So we've got our bets hedged in many different places. And in fact, entertainment industry, which people see as our signature industry, was never even a top 10 part of our economy in terms of industries until the 90s. And it's still in the bottom of those top 10 ones. So trade, tourism, technology, these are the big three, the three T's that drive our local economy. And they are all intimately tied with the global economy as well. I think that we can continue to set a standard around the world because one thing we continue to do is attract people. We attract people because of who we are, not because we're the cheapest, not because we're the easiest, not because we're the most nimble, but because of who we are. Collective creative capital that is in this room or on any given street in Los Angeles on any given day. To me, then you have to ask, what is the role then of my small part of this, of city government? What can we do to be a catalyst to encourage that Los Angeles still be framed as the center of a global economy, which will shift very quickly to other places if we don't do this right? And what can we do to maintain that leadership in the years to come? Well, as I mentioned, even though I came in and much of the work I'm proudest of is on affordable housing and on job training and things that I'll get to that are traditional Democrat or left-leaning things. One of the things that I'm probably most proud of was that after 30 years of talking, I led the fight to reduce our city's gross receipts tax. It's a business tax. Why it's called gross receipts is we tax businesses in Los Angeles whether or not they make money. It's not an income tax. So if you have $10 million because you're starting a new business and you lose $1 million of that, we will still tax the $10 million. So we'll give you an additional burden to slow you down even more and to incentivize you to leave LA City and go to Burbank, Glendale, Phoenix, Austin, someplace else. So after 30 years of talking that this was kind of a bad thing, we should look at weaning ourselves off of this. We passed a few years ago something that eliminated that tax for the 60% of the smallest businesses in LA and has reduced so far by about 15%, but continuing forward each year for the remaining 40%. That's about $100 million back into the economy each year. Why did I do this? I'll tell you a story. When I represent Hollywood, and Nielsen Company, which was based out of Chicago at the time, said they want to consolidate their headquarters. They do ratings, of course, for television and other things. They said, we would love to be in Hollywood. It's Hollywood, after all. I mean, we'd love to be at the heart of it all, and we see it coming back, but you have this thing called this gross receipts tax, and we need some parking. We figured out how to park them over at the ArcLight Cinemas because they wanted to go to Sunset and Vine area. And then we looked at the gross receipts tax and we found an underused piece of legislation that said in the Hollywood redevelopment area we could waive for an entertainment-focused company gross receipts tax for a few years. And when they did the calculation, they said, that is enough, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, we will come to LA. They brought over 500 jobs that averaged $70,000. The catalyst for the neighborhood, because those people eat at lunch and new restaurants have opened and there's a Borders bookstore across the street now and new housing and a Trader Joe's that's come in, and all these sort of things were because we were able to do something on taxes with them. That's why I also authored and just passed an internet tax classification for the city, because we have great companies like Shopzilla, which is run by a friend of mine from high school. They could be based anywhere. LegalZoom.com, which incorporated 1 out of 10 businesses in the state of California last year. Companies that we were taxing at such a high rate, they said, we're an internet company, we can be anywhere, we don't need to be in LA. And so we're creating a new tax category to keep more of them here in LA, because this has become one of the real centers for internet-based companies as well. But we also have to make sure that we have a workforce that knows what the global economy looks like and has the skills for it. Here's an interesting side note to the global context that we have. Kaiser and other local medical care providers a few years back, when I first started looking at this about a year after I was elected, didn't advertise anymore for nurse assistants and nurses in Los Angeles. They advertised in other states, they advertised in the Philippines, but not in LA, because we were producing so few people with those skills it wasn't worth their money to do so, and those people were snapped up very quickly. So here we have something healthcare, which can't be, shipped offshore, can't be taken to another state. We need our healthcare to be here. And yet we weren't providing, these are good paying jobs with a career path, we weren't providing the skills for people to enter that in those areas where we have healthcare provision. So we looked at our job training dollars that we get from the federal government. I chaired the committee that oversaw this, and working together with Metropolitan Alliance and some other folks that were community organizers, we said, let's come up with a career ladder based in the healthcare industry. Instead of opening up job centers where people come in and you do resume help and look through want ads, which is good, but not very strategic in terms of people's careers and skills. Let's say to folks, do you want a career in healthcare? Do you want a career in the energy industry? Do you want a green job in the future? Let's pick out 4 or 5 different career areas and then really train them. Use those dollars to give them the entry into the bottom rung through a vocational school to become nurse assistants. And after they become nurse assistants, we don't say, bye, good luck, thank you. We'll stay with them and say, hey, you ever thought of becoming a vocational nurse? And to the vocational nurses, hey, do you want to get the education to become a registered nurse? And maybe even a nurse practitioner. And what that does is it creates a pipeline of people who are coming out of healthcare deficient areas in Los Angeles, but also who can see a career path. We did that, and it has become the model, and our mayor has been working on this to expand that to about 5 different areas with Larry Frank, who I know is connected to UCLA as well, great deputy mayor is working on workforce development, to make sure that we are strategic in the trade industry and hospitality industries and other places, in other industries that we need to grow here to move that forward. Hilda Solis, our labor secretary, just came out. We just won a $3.6 million grant from the Department of Labor on that specifically. So we need to make this a friendly place to businesses, but we also need to make it friendly to workers, who right now are being caught between this barbell economy where the 300 wealthiest individuals in Los Angeles have the combined wealth of the 3 million poorest, where increasingly we do have a city of haves and have-nots, and we are gutting out that middle class, partially because housing prices, partially because of our education system, and partially because we're not encouraging businesses that kind of do have those middle class jobs to locate here anymore. So we have services and retail and not a lot more around there as well. Let me close on one end because I want to get to the conversation part, and I just want to touch on where we are and why this is such an important moment for LA City government too. As you've been reading in the paper, we face the most difficult fiscal challenge that certainly I have faced in my 9 years almost in elected office, and that we face probably in about 80 years in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. This year we faced a $450 million deficit that we will successfully close by June 30th, which is the end of our fiscal year. And we're facing another $500 million approximately deficit looking at this coming year. This is not uncommon. Los Angeles is no worse managed than other places. In fact, I would say that we are better managed. We have a more robust reserve fund, we have a lower level of debt, we have stricter fiscal policies, handcuffs that we put on ourselves, even in an era of turbulence where the temptation would be to start something and let the next gal or next guy figure out how to pay for it. We actually have put rules that we can't do that. But the recession, the Great Recession, has hit us especially hard here in Los Angeles. And our revenues have dropped by double digits for 4 quarters in a row for the first time since the Great Depression. On top of that, we see throughout the country a recovery that's coming back without jobs. And because government lags by about 12 or 18 months where the economy is, because remember our receipts come in during that year, so property tax is down, it'll take some months before we feel the effect of it. Our recovery from a government perspective will be at least a year behind the private sector. So right now we're faced with some pretty stark choices. And you don't run for office to just govern in good times. I knew that going in, but it's another thing to feel that, to know that, and to have people who are on layoff lists come to you and talk to you about their daughter who's in medical school in Mexico and will have to drop out because of this, or the home that they're losing next week because we've reduced the overtime that firefighters count on to be able to pay their bills and to meet their mortgages. But the 2 visions that I would offer before you at this time is there's one that is a very stark vision. Colorado Springs was highlighted in the New York Times. They are hit even a little harder than LA and a much more politically conservative place. And so they've decided what they're going to do to balance their budget in Colorado Springs is to take that hatchet and just go to 40% of what they do. They're laying off police officers and firefighters. There are police helicopters up on eBay if anybody's interested. It's a good time to buy. Their parks no longer will have any maintenance, so they're encouraging people to bring their own trash bags, to bring their lawnmowers on the weekends, or else the grass won't be cut in city parks. There won't be any personnel there. Their libraries are going to be shut down most days now. Half of their street lights turned off permanently. So when you walk home at night, you don't feel safe, and you don't encourage people to be out at night, and it becomes a spiral downward. So one vision, and there's a lot of people who are saying, thank God, because government does need to be starved and choked to death, and it's gotten too big, and we have to stop doing all those little programs that have been added over all those years by Democrats and others. On the other extreme is a vision of, I would say, the aspirationalists, who say, we always have tough times, but we find our way out of it. We can sell something off this year. The problem isn't as big. People are exaggerating it because they want to cut pensions and pay, and they're hostile to public workers. They essentially have their heads in the sand saying, I don't believe you, and even if I did, it's going to be okay. I think it's as critical to reject both perspectives right now, as somebody who's in the weeds and in the trenches looking at the numbers, as it is to reject the other. Because to do this is an unacceptable vision for me of what Los Angeles looks like. Talk about our place in the global economy. We no longer will have much of a place in the global economy if we aren't a place of creativity, and arts and culture programs disappear, and libraries are closed down multiple days, and the crime rate starts to shoot up. Over here, if we push off the hard truths about the things that are driving us in a bad year off of a cliff, our rising pension costs that have been very, very generous, our healthcare costs, which have more than tripled in a decade, looking at the kind of Christmas tree of bonuses that in nice years, those of us who are all pro-labor negotiate because we said, oh, why not give people a bonus for speaking Spanish at LAPD? Back in the days when nobody spoke Spanish at LAPD, that was an important bonus because that 1 out of 10 people had to work 4 times as hard because they always would take any Spanish-speaking folks over to them. But now everybody has to learn Spanish in the academy, but they get the bonus. And police get a bonus for being post-certified, which is something by law they have to be. It's their professional accreditation. We have firefighters who are paid overtime on vacation. Things which I don't blame a firefighter or a police officer who made the calculation knowing it's been that way for 20 years anyway. They came in, decided the size of their house, the schools their kids will go to, etc., based on that. So I understand how difficult it is for them right now when something gets pulled away. But as I was saying to somebody, I want to, and this is what I'll conclude on, I'm wondering who was there 20 years ago when these decisions were being made. And whether it helps me or hurts me politically, I want to make sure I do the right thing so that whoever my successor is 20 years from now says, thank God, I don't even know who it was, but that those people made the right decisions. Because if we are financially responsible for a year or two, the level of draconian cuts, that vision, that Colorado Springs vision, for lack of a better term, will be our only choice. Let alone that we may go towards bankruptcy. We're not going bankrupt this year, don't worry, you hear a lot about that, we're not, but we're perilously close if we don't make structural reforms, many of which we've set in motion. So our council and the mayor have focused on this. City council, as president, I get to convene them, decide who goes on which committees, and I said we're going to be meeting 5 days a week instead of 3 days a week. We work 7 days, but we meet formally 3 days a week, and I changed that to 5 days a week in January and February and part of March. And from that, we tripled the amount of reserve funds. We eliminated departments, we consolidated them, we started initiating some layoffs. We tried to move as many layoffs into positions of people that were retiring. We incentivized people to retire a couple of years early and got concessions from our current employees to pay the additional costs of that retirement. Things that were immensely difficult to do, but our workers actually did step up and do the right things. In this coming year, we're facing as many as 4,000 layoffs. We won't have 4,000 layoffs, but we need to eliminate the equivalent of 4,000 positions of a city that has about 40,000. But if you take cops and firefighters and people who are funded from what's called special funds, fees that pay and will never go away, it's about 4,000 would be about 1 in 3 civilian employees. If you don't think that would gut what we do and what libraries and parks do for our public safety, not just firefighters and cops, it would be pretty devastating. We will get through this time, but it will require all of us in Los Angeles to pull together. Not just to say the things that we're against, to say don't ever raise this fee or don't ever raise that tax, don't cut this, I can't see anything cut at all. But to do something in the middle to get through this time, to preserve a vision of a progressive city that does embrace more than just public safety in a narrow sense, that does understand that job training and good schools and all of those things are going to be part of our future, that does continue to encourage people to say the things that they're for, not just what they are against. Because when Father Juan Crespi wrote about that mission that was built, I told you it was never built brick by brick, but your decision and our decision right now is how we build that mission today for Los Angeles, block by block. What does that look like? Do we know each other? Will we know our neighbors? Will we say not only what we want, but what we will give up to get there? Because if we do, this room, this campus, this city is unmatched in the world. That's why we're all here. And I know that that is Los Angeles to come if we can make those decisions. Thank you.